Hi, I'm Glenn from Speak Life. We like to see all things through the lens of Jesus, including Richard Dawkins and his statements about cultural Christianity. He was asked by Rachel Johnson on LBC what his thoughts were on Christianity, on the cultural Christianity of Britain, and on the comparison with Islam. Let's take a look.
What would be your Easter message? I've said a few things. What would you tell the nation?
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer.
In the UK, the issue that Ramadan is happening at the same time as Lent has been a topic of great consideration. In the US, the fact that Joe Biden declared the 31st of March to be Trans Visibility Day is attracting equivalent interest about whether Easter means anything anymore. And it is interesting to me that the threat that Christians feel, or the threat that secularists feel in the UK, is that perhaps Ramadan is being trumpeted more loudly than Easter. In the US, it's interesting that trans visibility is becoming a cause that is trumpeted louder than Easter. Is it the case that both of these are religious truth claims that are competing with our cultural heritage that is Christian?
But there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian.
So Richard Dawkins says that he is a cultural Christian, and a lot of people on Twitter were seeming to kind of be surprised that Richard Dawkins says this. Richard Dawkins has been saying this forever. He has always said that he is a cultural Christian. I go back to 2011, and when the King James Bible was celebrating its 400-year anniversary, Richard Dawkins was one of the first to offer to the Bible Society to read a chapter of the Bible in the King James Version, and he is a great enthusiast for the King James Bible. Listen to him speak about this kind of cultural artifact that is bequeathed to us through Christianity.
You can't appreciate English literature unless you know something about the Greek gods. You can't appreciate Wagner unless you know something about the Norse gods. You can't appreciate English literature unless you are, to some extent at least, steeped in the King James Bible. There are phrases that come from it. People don't realize they come from it. Proverbial phrases, phrases that make echoes in people's minds. They haunt our minds because we are a Christian culture. We come from a Christian culture. And not to know the King James Bible is to be, in some small way, barbarian.
Wow. So we are a Christian culture to some degree. And to be ignorant of our Christian heritage is to be barbarian. Richard Dawkins then goes on to talk about many of the phrases that have passed on to us through the King James Bible.
I made a list, I think it was about 2 pages, of phrases that come from the Bible that many people don't even realize.
So Richard Dawkins comes up with 2 pages worth. I came up with 365, and I did a whole way of going through the Bible, through Old and New Testaments, 181 phrases from the Old Testament and 185 phrases from the New Testament. So in fact, there are 366 in that one, which means you can read it in a leap year. So 2024 is the year to get reading between the lines, and you can find more about this cultural artifact called the Bible and the ways in which it has passed into common parlance today. Richard Dawkins finishes off this little section by saying this.
Shake off the dust of your feet. Seeds falling upon stony ground. These are phrases that people use all the time. And you can't get your ear in for English unless you know the literature from which this comes, the King James Bible.
Yeah. Any other advice to us as a trust trying to open windows onto the world rather than close them?
Well, I think it is important to make the case that the Bible is part of our heritage, and it doesn't have to be tied to religion. I mean, it's of historic interest, it's of literary interest, and it's important that religion should not be allowed to hijack this cultural resource.
It's just a genius at the provocative phrase. So we mustn't let religion hijack the Bible. It's just brilliant. Instead, we should see it as a repository of aphorisms or something like that. That's what Richard Dawkins said back in 2011. So he's been saying this sort of stuff for a long time. In 2018, it was hilarious. He got into a lot of trouble by tweeting out his love of Winchester Cathedral and hearing its bells. So we've got a picture of him smiling in front of Winchester Cathedral, and he just says, listening to the lovely bells of Winchester, one of our great medieval cathedrals, so much nicer than the aggressive sounding Allahu Akbar Or is that just my cultural upbringing? And a lot of people have pointed out, perhaps that is just your cultural upbringing, Richard, and perhaps it's just the air we breathe, to use the phrase that titled my book of 2022. Perhaps Christianity has just become the air that we breathe, and we're not really aware of the way in which Christianity has pervaded our moral sensibilities and our ethos. But Richard Dawkins is self-conscious enough to say, look, we have a Christian ethos in this country, and I, for one, am glad that we have this sort of Christian ethos, even though I don't want you to get serious about the religion that actually birthed the culture, which is the tension at the heart of Richard Dawkins' position. He very much wants to have a Christian society, but he doesn't like the Christianity that produces that society, which puts him in a little bit of a bind. I saw somebody online say it's a little bit like saying, I'm very glad that there is such a thing as food, and I, for one, am in favor of food. I just don't think that there should be such things as butchers and abattoirs and gardens. He is naming something so vital to us and giving that to us with the one hand, and with the other hand, taking away the preaching of the gospel that actually provides what he so values. Anyway, he goes on to Rachel Johnson.
You know, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and
He always has.
I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense.
People hearing him say that from America hear a very different thing. It's like, is that Christian nationalism? Well, like in the UK, it's just a totally different thing. In the UK, the king is the governor of the Church of England. I'm ordained in the Church of England. Not only have I said vows to the bishop, I've said vows, well, I said vows to the Queen, but they now apply to the king. The king is the governor of the Church of England. In our upper house, the House of Lords, we've got bishops who by rights, sit there in these unelected posts in our legislature. And is Britain a Christian country? That is a far less contentious question than it is in the US. And it has absolutely nothing to do with ethno-nationalism, as I've seen a lot of people kind of say. That is to read the UK situation as though it's the US situation. It's an entirely different beast. But Richard Dawkins has always said we are a culturally Christian nation. And if you saw the coronation of King Charles, I don't know how you can disagree with that statement. The question comes, how do you relate cultural Christianity to the living, vital faith in Jesus that actually births such a thing? And there can definitely be a mistaking for the fruits of the Christian gospel with the roots that actually give you that Christian gospel. And it is very important not to look merely at the fruits and to cut away at the roots, which is what Richard Dawkins does. But it's also a little silly to deny that the roots of gospel preaching and the roots of faith in Jesus does not lead to culture and does not lead to certain political settlements and the opposition to other political settlements. It is ridiculous, really, to think that Christianity exists by itself and has no other fruit and has no other cultural expression. It has certainly had a cultural expression, and it has certainly contributed to the culture of not only Britain, but all over the world. This gospel seed has grown the largest of all plants, like Jesus says in Matthew chapter 13, so great that even the birds perch in its branches. It's so interesting. Matthew chapter 13, there is, to begin with, this satanic opposition to the word of God, and they peck at the seed, and, the birds had seemed so much bigger than the seed, which represents the word of God in Matthew chapter 13. By the end of Matthew chapter 13, the seed has grown into such a large tree that even the birds that had pecked at the seed, the word of God, are now perched within the branches of the kingdom which the word of Jesus has grown. Richard Dawkins is a perfect example of a bird who has pecked at the seed and not loved the gospel of Jesus Christ, but has very much loved the fruit that has come from the gospel of Jesus Christ and is perched on that branch, and has spent a lot of his career actually soaring at the branch on which he's perched. But that is the contradiction at the heart of Richard Dawkins.
It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down.
In the West.
I'm happy with that, but I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we certainly if we substituted any alternative religion, that would be truly dreadful.
So he very much likes the tree. He doesn't want the seed to be propagated. And that's the problem that he's got. The other problem that he's identifying is that in the absence of, let's say, Christian nationalism, but the phrase does not translate from the US to the UK. But anyway, but if he doesn't like a Christian society, well, guess what? You don't just get a neutral society. You get either what we're seeing in the UK, which is, Ramadan's on the rise and mosque buildings on the rise. We'll get into that in this video. Or you have the progressive kind of trans agenda and LGBTQIA+, and you've got that kind of settlement, which, if you're going to place your Trans Visibility Day on the 31st of March, which is Easter Sunday, you are saying that this is a day that should occupy sacred space. And it is not the case that if Christianity retreats, you just have this neutral place that is, a kind of a spiritual Switzerland. No. Other truth claims, other ideologies, other religions will flood in to that space, whether it's Islam or whether it's some of the new religious ideologies and identities. And so the idea that you can just have a secular space free from religious truth claims it is proven to be incorrect in practice. It's also an impossible project when you consider that Christianity is what gave you secularism in the first place. The secular is a profoundly Christian idea. So no wonder when institutional Christianity retreats, what you don't get is just pleasant Englishmen who enjoy the bells of Winchester Cathedral and, reading a good book on a Sunday. What you don't get that. You get other ideologies flooding in to take that space. We just do not live in a neutral world.
Well, which brings me to my supplementary point, which is that, as we know, church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I have to choose my words carefully. If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time.
The whole world has to choose between Christianity and Islam. Honestly, we don't need to choose. Actually, at the end of the day, given the way demographics are going globally, the big choice is not between Christianity or the new atheism. The new atheism is declining. The big choice moving forwards is Christianity or Islam. That's the massive choice. Atheism is shrinking as a proportion of global population, and it has been shrinking since the 1970s. The defeat of communism has absolutely contributed to that, but unbelief is on the wane, globally speaking. And the big question is, what is the future of the world? Is the future Christianity or Islam? Richard Dawkins is actually putting his finger on the huge issue as we move on in the 21st century.
It seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion in a way that I think Islam is not.
Christianity is a fundamentally decent religion. That's what Richard Dawkins is saying here. Of course, that's not what he says in the God Delusion. And I just heard Sam Harris say that, look, the new atheism was basically a publishing movement. And I think that's exactly right. The new atheism was a publishing movement. And there was a mood, okay? There were memes, appropriately enough, given that Richard Dawkins kind of was the inventor of the idea of memes in the genetic realm. So it's a meme, it's a mood, it's a publishing movement. And it certainly shifted a lot of copies of books to say that Christianity was indecent and that it would be a very good thing if there were no more Christians left on the planet. That was absolutely the movement of the new atheism. So I can understand why people are commenting about this video saying Christianity is fundamentally decent. In a sense, he's been changing his tune. But what Rachel Johnson wants to pick up is, are you saying that Islam is indecent?
I think you're going to have to explain why you say that, Professor Dawkins. Why is Islam fundamentally not decent like Christianity?
Yes, the way women are treated. Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things. But there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who of course are quite different, but the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays, and I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word.
So he zeroed in on the issue of women, which is interesting, and homosexuality, and that's interesting because I think we live in a Western culture in which the equality of the sexes and the fact that sexual minorities should not be mistreated but rather should be included is absolutely central to our moral vision of society. And my book, The Air We Breathe, kind of goes through the ways in which equality and compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, and progress are now the moral air that we breathe. But those things are not obvious. And you just have to visit a country that's under the rule of the Taliban, for instance, and you see that it is not obvious to a fundamentalist Muslim in that setting that men and women are equal. It's just not obvious, and it's not obvious that we should treat sexual minorities with any kind of compassion or a sense of equality. Where have these things come from? It's not even obvious biologically why we should treat different genders identically, and that all humans should have the same moral worth and dignity. I mean, you can map the human genome and you can discover all sorts of things about the human person. You will not discover their inviolable worth and dignity. Where is that written into the human genome? So biology doesn't give us these sorts of ideas. They are transcendent values that we kind of take on. And in the West, we've gone through a period of the mustard seed of the kingdom of Christ has grown and grown and grown, and we have come to see these things as obvious. They are now the air we breathe. They now feel to us as obvious and universal and just natural, but they're not natural. They're not natural. They have come to us through very specific ideological developments that have Christianity at the heart of them. And this is what Richard Dawkins wants to hold on to. He wants the branch on which he's perched, but he also wants to soar at the trunk. And this is his problem. And he's looking, one way and the other, and he's seeing that actually on matters of gender and sexuality, it's not that when you get rid of Christianity, you just have very sane, rational, reasonable arguments that we can all agree to in this secular space. What you have is Transvisibility Day occupying Easter Sunday in the popular consciousness. And Richard Dawkins is unnerved by that. He's unnerved by Islam. But what's his alternative? His alternative is a cultural Christianity that has no root. So what's the future of that?
Just for balance, should we say something about fundamentalist Christians who, we can see abortion rights, reproductive rights being rolled back in Republican states in America?
That's one way of framing it. Another way of framing it is we are identifying and acknowledging the full humanity of every member of the human family and deciding that at the frontier of this human rights challenge in which 1 million babies are killed every week in the world, there are certain people who are standing up and saying, those people matter. Mothers matter. Their children matter too. That's another way of framing what Rachel Johnson is calling the rolling back of reproductive rights.
So Christianity is still not without its problems when it comes to women.
But Rachel Johnson wants to do a both sides thing and say, are there not problems with some forms of Christianity? And so she puts that to Richard Dawkins.
And they're right.
Well, you didn't ask me about Christianity in America. That's a different matter entirely.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm sure we got some fundamentalist Christians here too, but not as public.
Well, insofar as fundamentalist Christians oppose evolution and think that the world was created 6,000 years ago, I mean, that is pernicious nonsense, of course.
It's good to see he hasn't lost any of the old fire.
Right. Well, so I think I see where you come from. I like the phrase, you're a cultural Christian. I think I'm a bit more than a cultural Christian, although, it does, my belief waxes and wanes. Would it be a good thing or a bad thing if we became a less Christian country? And just on the foundation of this nation, with the king being the head of church and state, do you think it provides a solid foundation that we would lose something if, let's say, there was a Muslim majority?
Well, yes. I think the king, when he was Prince of Wales, was actually rather sympathetic towards Islam, and one of the problems I felt. No, I think it would be a terrible thing. And insofar as Christianity can be seen as a bulwark against Islam, I think it's a very good thing. I mean, in Africa, for example, where you have missionaries of both faiths operating, I'm on Team Christian side as far as that's concerned.
It's interesting.
Glad to have you, Richard. Glad to have you.
You would be more of a Hitchinite, God is not great advocate. But it's interesting to me that you see the value and the force for good of the United Kingdom having a Christian foundation.
I mean, Christopher Hitchens was very much pro-George Bush going into Iraq. So I don't know if Christopher Hitchens would be saying anything other than what Richard Dawkins is saying here. I don't think actually what Dawkins is saying here is new. I don't think it's actually that sensational at all. He's not flip-flopping on this. He's always said this. He's always wanted the fruits without the root. And he's always been sawing off the branch on which he's been perched. That has been his shtick the whole time. But he's now being faced with the fact that, yes, there is Islam, and yes, there is whatever you want to call it, the successor ideology that is flooding in and taking the place of Christianity. And it turns out that we are ineradicably religious. He should have known that, because as an evolutionary biologist, of course, we would have evolved to have religion as this adaptive thing to the human person. He should have known that. But it seems like Richard Dawkins has lived under the godless delusion that we can be without God and simply occupy this simple secular space, not realizing that the secular is a gift from Christianity.
Yes, but I must emphasize that I think that the things that Christians believe are actually nonsense. I mean, I think that when you say you waver, I wanted to ask you, do you actually believe that Jesus had a virgin for a mother? Do you actually believe he rose from the dead?
Now, what's he doing here? He's actually trying to undermine her personal faith in Jesus while saying we must have Christianity as a bulwark against Islam, for instance. Why is he doing that? Why doesn't he say, well, it's good that Rachel Johnson has some form of belief. Let's try and fan into flame as much belief as we can, because we need this cultural Christianity as a bulwark against something that's much worse. Why doesn't he say that? Because he is very Christian. Because he's an evangelist, okay? Because he wants to spread the truth, because he's proselytizing, okay? And he's proselytizing because he has this view that the truth must be accepted by all other people. He's trying to persuade people of the truth of his atheism, even though he must know that that will undermine the cultural Christianity that he so values. So it's a fascinatingly Christian instinct that Richard Dawkins has. He wants to be an evangelist. He's evangelizing Rachel Johnson here and trying to spread the good news of the atheist gospel to her, even though it might undermine the Christian country that he so pleases. But he values that kind of truth, and the spreading of his missionary zeal trumps almost everything else. He's a profoundly Christian atheist. So here is Richard trying to push underneath Rachel Johnson's cultural Christianity to see if there is any faith under there, and he's trying to actually undermine it. So does Rachel actually believe? Let's see.
When you say you waver, I wanted to ask you, do you actually believe that Jesus had a virgin for a mother? Do you actually believe he rose from the dead? I suspect
well,
you probably
weirdly,
don't.
since you ask, Richard, if I may, because I was at New College when you were are you still a Don at New College? Yes.
Well, I'm retired.
You're retired,
yes,
but you don't look anyway. Weirdly, I was just 3 weeks ago at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, where the Christians believe that Christ was crucified, or there was the tomb, and the Gethsemane was just there, and Golgotha was there. And I have to admit that there is a real force. I mean, it feels like the fulcrum of three world religions. It really does.
So Richard Dawkins is wanting to get at heart-level beliefs and her convictions and her personal kind of inventory of stuff that she believes. And Rachel is going to something that is not simply a cultural Christianity. She's not just saying, well, I'm glad that I was, baptized into the Church of England and that the king is the governor of the Church of England. She's not just saying that. She is saying that there are ways that I can submit myself to the Christian story, and I find that powerful. She hasn't yet dealt with what about the virgin birth, what about the resurrection? And so there's this mediating thing. It's not simply the case that a Christian country is defined by having a Christian king, for instance. There are things like cathedrals, and there are things like church services that you can go to, and with your kind of wavering faith that comes in and out, you can submit yourself to something that is somehow super rational, but Dawkins is not going to be content with that.
And Christianity is palpable there. The place pulses with Christianity.
Which is interesting.
I don't know whether it made me believe the Bible anymore, but I certainly felt that Jesus was a historical figure. Yes, I did believe that.
Well,
am I wrong to think that?
No. I mean, that's quite different. But
okay, I'm glad that he's now saying that yes, Jesus is absolutely a historical figure. He kind of has this one sentence in the God Delusion where he casts doubt on that, which is a ridiculous thing to say. But Dawkins is going to press her. Do you believe? I mean, really believe?
do you believe that his mother was a virgin?
So what do we say when Richard Dawkins presses us for that level of personal faith? Do I believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? Yeah, I happen to believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. But if you believe that the universe came out of nothing, then you believe in the virgin birth of the cosmos, but without a virgin. It's the ultimate magic trick, really. It's kind of nothing up the sleeve, no magician, nothing but pure magic. Out of nothing has come everything. That is the ultimate virgin birth, actually. So, Christians who believe in the virgin birth, is that a miracle to believe in? Sure. But the universe we live in is a kind of a virgin birth place, actually. And to focus your faith on the Jesus story as that which explains the whole is not one more absurdity that you are to sign up to. It's actually the miracle that explains the miraculous universe that you live in. That's what I'd say about the virgin birth.
Do you believe that his mother was a virgin?
Well, I mean, maybe that was a mistranslation of... Well, that's biologically impossible, isn't it?
That's biologically impossible. Okay, so we're just going to go down to what is biological. Okay, well, interesting.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I used to make a joke that most second children are virgin births because you can... Anyway, we don't want to go into that. Yes. But yes, you know what I'm saying. Were you pleased that Rishi Sunak talked about Christian values in his... He said Christian values are British values in his Easter message. You seem to be on the same page.
Yes, I didn't hear that, but
that's what he said.
Yes, I suppose so. But I don't want to be misunderstood. I mean, I do think it's nonsense. But the Christian belief. Today is Easter, and of course I don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and I don't believe you do either.
Okay.
Do you?
Oh, he is such an evangelist. So it's Easter Day. He really doesn't want Ramadan sort of flooding in. There's all sorts of Christians in the States that see that something like Transvisibility Day is another claimant upon our allegiance. And on this day of days, what is going to occupy that space and say to us who we are and what we actually stand for? And Richard Dawkins says, I really like having a Christian culture and a Christian civilization. But on this day of all days, I want to take the opportunity to undermine Rachel Johnson's faith in the resurrection. Why would he do that? Except that he is an evangelist. He's a missionary. He's an incredibly Christian atheist. How is Rachel Johnson going to respond?
Do I believe that Jesus rose from the dead? I mean, you're really putting me on the spot. I would like to believe he did. Yes, I mentioned the resurrection. I mentioned the resurrection.
So she would like to believe in the resurrection. Rachel Johnson, you can believe in the resurrection. Richard Dawkins believes that life emerged from non-life. That is where he thinks we've come from. He thinks that somehow chemistry turned itself into biology. Now, I happen to believe that Jesus walked out of that tomb 2,000 years ago, that on the first Easter Sunday, the non-living Jesus became living again. That is a miracle. In one sense, that's really hard to believe. But the miracle that Richard Dawkins believes in is orders of magnitude more improbable. I think the non-living Jesus became living. Richard Dawkins thinks that all life emerged from non-life, and without a God of resurrection to work the wonder. That's quite the miracle, right? When I say I believe that the non-living Jesus became living again, I'm not offering you one more absurdity that you can add to your worldview. I'm offering you the inner logic that explains a universe that would otherwise be absurd. You see, Richard Dawkins doesn't know how to answer the four most fundamental questions. Why have we got everything from nothing? Why have we got order from chaos? Why have we got life from non-life? Why have we got consciousness from mindless matter? Why have we got any of these things? All of these are Easter-like miracles. All of these are life from the dead. All of those make a virgin birth and Jesus walking out of the Jerusalem tomb look like child's play. The miracles at the heart of the Easter story are there to explain what would otherwise be absurd. They are not themselves the absurdity. So that's what I would say to Richard Dawkins. Rachel Johnson is in a different place, but really what I want to press into is why is Richard Dawkins trying to undermine Rachel Johnson's faith when actually what he wants is a Christian culture? And this is where so many people are nowadays. There are a lot of people worried about where Western civilization is going as institutional Christianity is more in the rearview mirror, and they're very worried by what might take its place, whether it's a successor ideology that's very new, or whether it's something like Islam that is very old and very robust. We are worried that without Christianity at the center of our culture, something else will flood in to that spiritual vacuum. And you're not wrong to be worried about that. There is no spiritual Switzerland, okay? If Jesus is not at the center of our culture, something else will be. And so many people like Richard Dawkins are like the bird that is perched in the branch of the tree. And yet they want to keep on gobbling up the seed of the Word of God. And they keep wanting to hack away at the trunk. And they keep wanting to divorce themselves from the roots that have given them the fruits that they so love. And that is just a recipe for disaster.
When my son was 2, we took him to church, and the priest said, "You can ask me anything." And he said that my 2-year-old son asked the priest, "Do you know Jesus to be true, or do you believe Jesus to be true?" And do you see what I mean? And he couldn't answer that question himself.
The child of Rachel Johnson is the child of the Enlightenment. That is the sort of the divide that has happened ever since Kant, ever since Hume. We've thought that there are facts over here and there are values over here. And we've lent into the facts. And we believe that Jesus was a historical figure, but biologically it's impossible that he rises from the dead, right? And so we've all kind of done a Dawkins. We've all tried to do a Dawkins, okay? We've all tried to live in a universe of pure facts. And it just crumbles through our fingers. It has no substance to it, and it cannot have substance to it. So here's my plea. If you're the Richard Dawkins type, or you're the Rachel Johnson type, or you're just tuning in to another YouTube video and it served this up to you out of nowhere, well, I'm glad that you've stayed the course until this point. You must be interested enough to have a look into Christianity 101. We've done a Christianity 101 for you. It's called 321. You can go to 321course.com and you can binge the whole thing in a couple of hours, or you can do it over 8 different sessions. There are captivating visuals and big picture ideas that will really get you thinking about life according to Jesus. So go to 321course.com, and if you've got this far, why don't you give the video a like? You can subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much.